Today's big show is on cultural diversity and similarity. I'm going to start, though, talking about cultural change. Culture changes for three main reasons. First of all, with a discovery. Discovery is the process of finding something that already exists. One example of that would be this picture here of women Olympic sprinters. Women have had athletic ability since there have been women. But it wasn't really until the second half of the 20th century that Americans began to appreciate the athleticism that women have or could have. And after that, when that change began, especially in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, when they began to really appreciate that athleticism, the entire culture changed as far as women getting paid to compete professionally in different sports, even to the high school level where there is an equal number of sports between males and females. A second cause of cultural change would be invention. This is the creation of something new. Before the smartphone, the world was a much different place. Smartphones have been around for 20 years, and the advent of the smartphone changed everything. It changed the way schools do business. It changed the way we drive, the way we eat and shop, and everything. The invention of the smartphone changed everything and changed our culture. And the last type of cultural change is diffusion. This is the borrowing of aspects of culture from other cultures. I have a couple pictures on this to show you. The first one is McDonald's in Iran. Even in Iran, a country that is not fond of the United States or American culture, they have McDonald's. The other picture is KFC in Japan, and it's an interesting study if you ever look into the impact that Kentucky Fried Chicken has had on Christmas in the country of Japan. They certainly borrowed elements of our culture and put it in their culture. Diversity is the condition of being made up of different elements such as racial identities, ethnicities, and religious beliefs. Cultural diversity exists in all societies. In every society, there is diversity because there's different genders. In almost every culture has different races, different religious beliefs, different ethnicities. A subculture is a group that is part of the dominant culture but differs from it in some important respects. What's pictured here is Little Havana in Miami, Florida. Now, if you go there, in fact, right on this street corner it goes a little beyond that, but this is kind of like the central hub of Little Havana. The signs of the businesses, almost all are in Spanish. You go into businesses and no one speaks English there. They all speak Spanish. There's an ice cream place just down the block from this corner. And when you go in there, the signs up in the ice cream place everything's in Spanish. And if you don't speak Spanish, you do feel like you're in a foreign country. That's a specific culture, a subculture, I should say, that's part of the American culture. It differs from the main American culture in some important respects, but it's still part of our American culture. Now, that's a little bit different than a counterculture. A counterculture is a subculture that deliberately and consciously is opposed to certain central beliefs or attitudes of the dominant culture. Pictured here are some white supremacist group that were protesting, and they are actively against significant elements of our culture, things like trying to avoid racism or violence or celebrating belief system. If in other pictures of white supremacists, white nationalists, you see carrying Nazi flags and things, elements that are against or central beliefs of our culture, they would be against. They're still part of our culture, but it's called counterculture. Now, ethnocentrism is an idea that fits in with this. That's judging others in terms of one's cultural standards. See, once people learn their culture, they become strongly committed to it, and they tend to negatively view cultural practices different from their own. Pictured here is from Bangkok, Thailand. And in Thailand, they have street food, just like every place has street food. But in this particular vendor, and there's a whole section of vendors like this, these are selling scorpions, and you can buy insects and scorpions for snacking. Street vendors. Those of us that lean more towards ethnocentrism might judge this more negatively. They, of course, would consider them delicious. Ethnocentrism, though, isn't necessarily all bad. It builds group loyalty, and it does help maintain traditions. However, it can lead to rigidity and make needed change difficult. We so strongly hold on a tradition we refuse to change, and it can divide people and lead to violence. Another element of this whole cultural diversity along this whole topic is this idea of cultural universals. Cultural universal would be a general cultural trait that exists in all cultures. A good example pictured here is this idea of a family. Every culture that does exist, that has existed in the past, and that will exist in the future has some type of family structure. There has to be some way to raise the children, from infant through toddler all through childhood. Every culture has some kind of family. Now, they may not look the same in every culture, and that's where we get into cultural particulars, the ways in which a culture expresses universal traits. Another culture universal is education. Every culture has some sort of education in which they take the important learning, and the word important there is in quotes because every culture thinks its learning is important, but it may not be seen as universally important. Every culture has an educational system, but how it is displayed or it's practiced is an example of cultural particulars. This picture here is a school run by the Taliban in Afghanistan. It looks much different than the school that you go to, but it's an example of cultural particulars. And that's your big show for today.